Intersectionality conceptual map video. Power. What is it? How does it shape our lives? Power affects all of us. However, we don't all experience it in the same way. Power can be privilege, control, capacity, disadvantage, influence. Power exists between people and between groups of people. Power is not always visible. Often it is hidden or invisible. This image, made by Kriya, shows this really well. By reflecting on our own sources of power in areas where we lack power, we begin to understand where we are able to influence decisions that affect our lives and where we experience discrimination, barriers, and risks. There are 5 different types of power. Each type illustrates one's relationship with having or lacking power. Let's have a look. Power over is when someone or a group of people are able to influence or exert control over others. Power to is when people come together to change existing hierarchies and structures. Power with is collective power of communities and organizations. Power within is the capacity of a person to exercise agency over their own decisions and actions. Power under is about feeling under it, overwhelmed, lost, out of control. Power relations shape people's life choices, access to resources, and opportunities. They influence beliefs, narratives, and behaviors within our societies, whether as individuals, as part of a larger group, or within institutions and structures. The socio-ecological model highlights how power inequalities take place at multiple levels of society, and so we must address root causes of power differentials at the individual, interpersonal, community, and societal levels. We will come back to this model later on in this video. Power differentials in systems of oppression such as ableism, sexism, ageism, classism, and homophobia create unequal power relations across communities by distributing power in a way that results in certain privileges or disadvantages based on characteristics like social, economic, and political class, gender, education, race or ethnicity, immigration status, disability, etc. The results of these systems of oppression look like discriminating policies and practices and inequalities in people's health, income, wealth, education, social outcomes, and also if and how a person or group is put at an increased risk of violence. We use several visuals to help us understand power and privilege. Here is another one. It will be explained in this next video.
The wheel of power and privilege provides a snapshot of how power is surrounded by and interacts with different social identities. On the wheel we can see the many different systems of oppression, or isms, that exist across societies, demonstrating the power inequalities that exist based on people's different characteristics and lived experiences. The innermost circle includes dominant groups that hold more advantages, or power, in most societies. Anyone who can identify with one or more identities in the inner circle has a high degree of power. For instance, white, straight, male, etc. The second circle represents non-dominant, or marginalized groups that hold less power in most societies. For instance, immigrant, rural, disabled, and so on. The black circle indicates common social categories, or identities. The outer circle represents different systems of oppression, sometimes referred to as the isms, that reinforce these power relations and disparities. These systems perpetuate the oppression of marginalized groups, while continuing to elevate the privilege of dominant groups. For instance, homophobia, ableism, racism, or colonialism. It is only by addressing the system that we will be able to make systemic changes.
For example, when someone experiences inequality and discrimination based on their race, the system that perpetuates this type of oppression is called racism. When someone experiences inequality and discrimination based on their disability, the system that perpetuates this type of oppression is called ableism. Intersectionality is when unequal power relations overlap, deepening their impact on a person or group and producing specific forms of inequality and discrimination. By applying an intersectional lens, we can understand who is experiencing inequality and better address the root causes of intersecting inequalities. Intersecting equalities related to a person's overlapping identities can also change over time and over their life cycle. It is also different across cultures, and therefore applying an intersectional lens is context-specific. The concept comes from Black feminism and was developed by Kimberly Crenshaw. It describes how a person can experience multiple systems of oppression at the same time. It is an important lens because our lived experiences are complex, not homogeneous. Have a look at this next video about intersectionality.
What is intersectionality? Intersectionality is a way of understanding social relations by examining intersecting forms of discrimination. This means acknowledging that social systems are complicated and that many forms of oppression, like racism, sexism, and ageism, might be present and active at the same time in a person's life. Everyday approaches to building equality tend to focus on one type of discrimination, for instance sexism, and then work to address only that specific concern. But while the career of a young, white and able-bodied woman might improve with gender equality protections, an older, black, disabled lesbian may continue to be hampered by racism, ageism, ableism and homophobia in the workplace. Intersectionality is about understanding and addressing all potential roadblocks to an individual or group's well-being. But it's not as simple as just adding up oppressions and addressing each one individually. Racism, sexism and ableism exist on their own, but when combined, they compound and transform the experience of oppression. Intersectionality acknowledges that unique oppressions exist, but is also dedicated to understanding how they change in combination. The roots of intersectionality lie within the Black feminist movement, with legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw originating the term. Crenshaw felt that anti-racist and feminist movements were both overlooking the unique challenges faced by Black women. She stated that legislation about race is framed to protect Black men, and legislation about sexism is understood to protect white women. So simply combining racism and sexism together does not therefore protect Black women. Intersectional theory is now applied across a range of social divisions and also to understandings of domination, such as those associated with whiteness, masculinity, and heterosexuality. Intersectionality is not only about multiple identities, and it's not a simple answer to solving problems around equality and diversity. It is, however, an essential framework as we truly engage with issues around privilege and power and work to bring them into the open. Intersectionality means listening to others, examining our own privileges, and asking questions about who may be excluded or adversely affected by our work. As importantly, it means taking measurable action to invite, include, and centre the voices and work of marginalised individuals.
What is the interrelationship of power, intersectionality, and GBV? The power relations that shape general beliefs, narratives, and behaviors within individuals, groups, communities, and society also influence beliefs, narratives, and behaviors around violence. This can manifest as cultural violence, structural violence, and direct violence. Gender-based violence, or GBV, can be cultural, structural, and direct forms of violence. It is defined as different types of violence perpetrated against someone based on their biological sex or gender identity, and can be violence that is physical, psychological, sexual, or economical in nature. Societies that perpetuate sexism and genderism, such as patriarchal societies, have discriminating and harmful social norms, laws, policies, practices, and institutions that disproportionately affect women, girls, and gender non-conforming people in all of their diversities. Within patriarchal systems, men and boys are bestowed more power than women, girls, and gender non-conforming people. These power inequalities result in higher risks of GBV for these groups. However, gender is only one characteristic and isn't the only dimension that needs to be explored to understand the inequalities that happen under patriarchy. Let's have a look at what that looks like. This image will help us ground power in a socio-ecological model to understand how power is structured at different levels of society. This can be seen at the center of the image. And how power can manifest in GBV at different levels of society. On the left side, when power is systematized through systems of oppression, on the right side. In the center, you have the different levels of society: individual, interpersonal, community, and bigger society. On the left, the blue squares represent different forms of GBV and a two-sided arrow to show that GBV runs across all of these levels. For example, femicide, sexual violence, child marriage, intimate partner violence, etc. On the right, pink squares represent different systems of oppression and a two-sided arrow to show that systems of oppression run across all of these levels. For example, ableism, sexism, classism, ageism, etc. When systems of oppression become embedded at different levels of society, such as in personal relationships and cultural norms, where greater power and privilege reside with dominant groups, these power imbalances can lead to forms of GBV. When applying this socio-ecological model to GBV, we learn that violence is rooted in social and cultural beliefs that men should be in charge of making decisions within families and control the finances. GBV can materialize as men forcibly making decisions over women's bodies and their personal freedom. At a structural level, current statistics show us that 58 countries do not criminalize marital rape and 68 countries continue to criminalize consensual same-sex relationships. By applying an intersectional lens to GBV, we begin to better understand how inequalities exacerbate each other, which intensifies the risk of GBV. For example, an adolescent girl with an intellectual disability will lack more power and privileges than her non-disabled male peer in a society that perpetuates ableism, sexism, and ageism. These intersecting forms of discrimination put her at higher risk of GBV when her rights, needs, and social protections are not prioritized by her community. Men and boys are also negatively impacted by society, especially when their experiences overlap with other areas of their lives where they have less power. For example, a white man from the global north who speaks fluent English will not experience the same unique forms of discrimination that a black man from the global south who does not speak any English will experience in the same society. The latter is being impacted by intersecting oppressions of racism, colonialism, classism, and xenophobia, among others. To prevent and respond to GBV, we must address all forms of inequality and look at how different people experience discrimination in diverse ways, so that our strategies are intersectional and equitable. At the heart of this is our individual, interpersonal, community, and socio-social relationships with power. By embracing power within and power with each other, people and their communities can drive the power to eliminate discrimination and inequalities that perpetuate GBV.
This video was produced by Humanity and Inclusion, in collaboration with Rooted Impact, and with support from the Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance of the United States Agency for International Development.